Hello and welcome to Producing and Consuming OData in a Silverlight and Windows Phone 7 application. This is part 3 of the series, and it is the final part of the series. I would encourage you to check out part 1 and 2. Okay, for a brief introduction, my name is Michael Crump. I am an MCPD. I blog all things Silverlight and WPF and Windows Phone 7 at michaelcrump.net. You can also check me out on Twitter at mbcrump. And don't forget to visit silverlightshow.net for hosting the article, hosting the video, and taking care of the Silverlight community. Okay, so just a recap of what we did in some of the previous sections. If you remember in part 1, we produced an OData data source, and we did that by creating an empty ASP.NET web project, generating a SQL Compact 4 edition database. We then populated it with some data. Then we created our Entity Framework 4 model, and then the OData data service. And then we queried the OData data service using the browser, and then finally through LinkPad. In part 2 of this series, we created a Silverlight 4 application, and we queried the OData data service using a little code behind. And then we added additional sorting and filtering of the data. In part 3, and the final part of the series, what we're going to do is we're going to consume the OData data service using Windows Phone 7. We're going to generate a proxy that our Windows Phone 7 application would use. Then we're going to add the required DLLs and class files to our Windows Phone 7 application. And then we're going to create the user interface and add a little code behind to pull the data into our application. So now what we're going to do is we're going to test the OData data service before getting started with our Windows Phone 7 application. So hopefully you completed part 1 and 2 of this series. If you have not, you can continue with this exercise by downloading the completed source code to part 2. I would also recommend, if you can, go ahead and watch the video to part 1 and to part 2 to have a better understanding of what we're doing. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to pull up Visual Studio, and I'm going to go to the project that we were working on at the end of part 2. And in this project, you will see we have our customer service.svc. This was our empty ASP.NET project. You can see what it's turned into now, and here's our Silverlight application. So go ahead and right click on your customer service.svc and do a view in browser. And if everything is up and running properly, then you should see this screen. I'm using Internet Explorer 8. You can use anything else. Any other browser will work just fine. So if you have this screen, then we know everything's working properly and we can continue. If not, go ahead and download the completed solution. And you can find that on silverlightshow.net and going into part 2 of this series. So at this point, we're going to leave this instance of Visual Studio running because we're going to use this OData data service in our getting started part. You may also want to go ahead and copy and paste this URL right here, because what we're really going to be concerned about is the port number. So if you copy and paste this now and maybe put it in a notepad, then we're going to be using that later. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to actually download some of the tools that we're going to use in order to retrieve the data from our OData data source into Windows Phone 7. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to navigate over to the Open Data Protocol. So I'm going to zoom in here and you'll see if you navigate to odata.codeplex.com, you'll be presented with this screen. So at this point, go ahead and click on Downloads, and when you click on Downloads, the only thing that we're really interested in here is the OData client binaries and code gen tool for Windows Phone. So go ahead and download that by clicking on the hyperlink here, and when you do that, you will get a zip file, and once you extract that zip file, you will have contents that are very similar to this right here. So now let me see. So at this point we can go ahead and I can give you a quick explanation of each of these files. So I'm going to take this screen, I'm going to zoom back in again where maybe you can see them a little bit better. So the first file, create class file.bat, that's a bat that I'll show you how to create a little bit later on in the section. The customers model.cs is the proxy that we are going to create. The data svc util.exe is the utility that will create our class file from our OData service. The readme.txt is a sample command line for creating the class file from using the Netflix OData data service. And finally, the last two DLLs, the system.data.services.client and the system.datasys.services.design, they're the class libraries that we're going to add to our Windows Phone 7 project. And actually, we will only add the system.data.services.client. Okay, so now that we have tested our OData data service and downloaded the tools, let's get started by creating the proxy that our Windows Phone 7 application will use. First, we're going to need to go to a command prompt in order to generate the proxy. So if you're using Windows 7, you can pretty much just go to Start, type in CMD, and at this point you'll be up to your command prompt. I'm going to close this one out because I already have one that I've navigated to where I need to be, and that is listed right here. So that now we've navigated to where we need to be, I'm going to give you the command, which I can right click and do an edit here, and this command is also included in the part 3 article, so you can check it out there if you don't want to try to type all of this out. But we have a call to our data svc util on our URI, which is our http://localhost. On our customer service.svc, out is going to be a customers model.cs, and we're going to do version 2.0, which is our data service collection. So I'm going to back out of here. I'm going to close this. I'm just going to rename this where we can generate it from scratch. Hit yes here. I'm back into my command prompt, and I'm just going to simply type in. Let me make sure the proxy is correct first. So we go edit, and we see it's at 6844, and it's still at 6844, as you can see there. Minimize this screen, close out of this one, and from here I'm going to type create class file.bat. And if everything worked as planned, you should notice that we have 0 errors and 0 warnings. If you have an error, then step through beginning of each part of the tutorial. Make sure you haven't left anything else. If all else fails, you can just download a completed solution by going to the top of the article in part 3. If we navigate back to the folder, we're going to find a new file, and it is going to be called customersmodel.cs. I'm going to close out of this, and there is our customersmodel.cs. And as I said earlier, I have the create class file.bat where you don't have to type this in. You're going to probably want to make a bat file like this, where in the future all you have to do is simply right click, do an edit, change the URI to wherever the service is at, and the name, and to be able to generate these a little bit more quicker. So now that we have everything in place, let's go ahead and create our Windows Phone 7 application. I already have an instance of Visual Studio created. I'm going to click New Project here, and I'm going to go down to Silverlight for Windows Phone. And now that I'm here, I want to go ahead and click Windows Phone Panorama Application, and let's give this a name of SL Show OData P3. And once that's complete, just go ahead and hit OK here. It'll take it a minute or two to spin up. Okay, now that the project is loaded, the first thing, let's just go ahead and add a reference. So we click Add Reference, and I'm going to go Browse, and this is the directory that of the OData system.data.services.client that we extracted, and I'm going to double click on this DLL and hit OK. Give it a second, and it should be loaded in at this point. So now we need to add the proxy that the data service utility.exe tool created. So let's go back to our project. Let's go right click, add existing item, and I'm just going to navigate to C drive, and I'm selecting my customers model.cs. So now if we double click that, we can kind of look and tell what that data services utility created, and this is that file. And so now that we have that in there, we can go ahead and create the user interface. So now let's go ahead and double click on our main page.xaml, and we're basically just going to replace the panorama item 1, and you can grab this code snippet from the actual article. So I'm just going to go right here. I've already copied it. I'm going to paste it. Now that I've pasted it, you're not going to be able to see a whole lot visually, but I'm going to come back over here and give a brief explanation of what we did. So let me scroll this out a little bit. Okay, so this XAML should be pretty straightforward. We have a list box that contains a data template with a stack panel, that each text box is binding to an element from our collection. So we have our first name, we have our last name, we have our address, city, state, and zip. I'm going to make the first name and the last name have a larger style where we can see those, and the other elements, the city, state, zip, and the address, is just going to have a phone text subtitle style. So now that we're finished with our UI and adding our service reference and adding our proxy, let's go ahead and add some code to call our OData service. So this part, again, I already have a code snippet ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate over to our main page.xaml.cs, and this template is originally used in a model view model pattern. In my example, I'm just trying to get the point across. So I'm going to delete all of this, and I'm going to replace it with my code snippet. So there's a couple of using statements and namespaces we need to add in. With just a couple of clicks, I can see that we've added our using space for customers model, and we've added our using system.data.services.client. So let's go over a couple of these lines. So starting from the main page, lines 1 through 5 is just standard code generated except for the loaded event. The loaded event, basically created a new event handler called the main page loaded. And starting on this line, this creates a new context with our customer entities, which was generated using the data services utility that we downloaded earlier, and it passes the URI of our data service, which is located in our ASP.NET project that we have running called customerservice.svc. After that, we create a data service collection which provides the notification if an item is added, deleted, or the list is refreshed. It is expecting a collection that was also created using the data services util tool. Then we are setting the item source of our list box to the collection. Then we create a query that returns all records in our collections, where we'll modify this shortly to create a where and an order by example. And the last few lines are basically checking for an error and displaying a message box. And of course, in a production application, you probably want to log that error instead of interrupting the user with a message like this. So let's go ahead at this point, and I want it just to be a very standard return our first run through. So I'm going to comment out this other line that says bar query and just use our / customer infos. And I'm going to do debug, and I'm going to do start without debugging. Give this a minute or two to spin up. Thankfully I'm on a solid state drive, so it shouldn't take too long. Okay, and now at this point you'll see that we have our list. Michael Crump, we have a Marie, we have Joanne, we have a Craig Cumberland. So our items are coming in, and we have now consumed an OData data service. So let's go back to our project where we were at, and let's add a filter by the ID is greater than 3, and let's order it by the first name. So we should only get 2 returns in this. So let's start without debugging again. And as you see here, we only have 2 items. So if you stop and notice, we're not using link like we used in the first part to produce the query. Instead, we are writing the query manually. This is because this is an early implementation of OData on the Windows Phone 7, and it does not support the link method in the current release. But do not worry, as they will probably address this in a later release. So let's go back to our slides. So at this point, we have seen how you would produce and consume an OData data source using the web browser, LinkPad, to Silverlight, to Windows Phone 7. We've learned how to do basic sorting and filtering using the same. Now you should be equipped with a solid understanding of producing and consuming OData data services, and you can start using this in your own applications. If you have any questions, contact me at michaelcrump.net. You can email me michael@michaelcrump.net, or you can send me a tweet on Twitter at mbcrump. Don't forget to visit silverlightshow.net for the latest in Silverlight, Windows Phone 7 news, tutorials, screencast, etc. And a special thank to silverlightshow.net for supporting my user group all about XAML. Thank you. Until next time.